privilege this evening to introduce Father Eduardo Scorell. He is a Carmelite priest, and I know that all the Carmelites are bursting with pride tonight as we come together. Father Eduardo was born in Argentina. He earned a doctorate in atmospheric and oceanic sciences from Buenos Aires State University. He also earned a degree in theology from Buenos Aires Salesian Theology Institute. And in 2006, he joined as a researcher the interdisciplinary team for studies in climate, economy, and peoples. This team was strongly supported by the Cardinal of Buenos Aires, who is now Pope Francis, our Holy Father. He later became the director, Father Eduardo later became the director of that team from 2015 to 2017. He is an internationally respected priest and climatologist, and he studies the relationship between science and faith, spirituality and ecology, something so much needed for our society, for our world, and for our church. He also serves on international climate panels. At the present time, he is the chair professor and researcher of astronomy and geophysics at the State University of La Plata since 2014. He was an advisor to Pope Francis in formulating the encyclical Laudate Si on care of our common home. And I know that all of us have read it, we cherish it. It gives us not only insight, but some direction. And we're grateful to Father Eduardo for being an advisor to our Holy Father. Father Eduardo currently works with Global Catholic Climate Movement in Rome and also the Pontifical Integral Human Development. And tonight he will address us on the environmental justice through the lens of the encyclical, Caring for Our Common Home. Father Eduardo, we thank you for being in the United States. We thank you for the many talks that you will be giving throughout our country. And we are honored and very grateful that you are here with us tonight to share your wisdom and to inspire us. Please join me in welcoming Father Eduardo.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for being here tonight together to share some reflection on environmental justice and climate change. Thanks, Father Greg, for the welcoming words. Really, I appreciate to be here. I feel happy and honored to be among you and in this lovely city, New Orleans. I've been here, I think this is my 4th time. Every time I come here, I meet lovely people and also I eat lovely food. So I'm happy to be here, really. So, well, concerning climate change, as you can see in the subtitle of this talk, Pope Francis, in his encyclical Laudato Si speaks, it represents one of the principal challenges facing humanity in our day. And we're going to go deep into why we can say this is really a principal challenge, and it's a reality that is affecting everybody worldwide and will worsen in the future. The Church has a particularity. It's an institution, we are an organization worldwide and open to the world. When we come to what one might call domestic policy, probably the Church, we are often considered to be a conservative institution. Well, it may be. Yet when we come to relationships between nations and global policy to the poor and nature, we have reasons to come off as among the most liberal organizations in the world. If we see around us what's going on in many nations concerning issues like migrants, refugees, or even climate change, Many countries are closing themselves into ideologies, into closure mentalities, while the church is in the front line. Last year, for instance, Pope Francis, the church in the Holy See, have developed a guideline on 20 actions on refugees and migrants for pastoral use and also for dialogue with our governments. And these documents, these inputs from the church have helped shaping the final document that was endorsed in December last year by the UN Department of Migration. So I think that the church is working a lot in the field of climate change, but also nowadays in opening the arms of our human beings, right? So the topic tonight, I have three goals. The main goal is gonna just show you what is not the encyclical by saying what is the encyclical about, and the main message. So I don't know if you have read the encyclical already. If not, I suggest you to do so. But you will find that it's a kind of thick book, though not heavy to read, because it's easily reading. I mean, it's not an academic tome heavy to digest. It's very simply to read, though it has a lot of paragraphs, about 246 paragraphs. And when you go through the encyclical, you maybe get lost at the beginning. Once you go back 1, 2, 3 times again to its reading, you will start enjoying the message of this encyclical. So I will try to focus on the main message, that is a theological or a spiritual message, and then I will go deeply in the scientific basis of climate change, that I think it's something that you are mostly interested in, and that I can give you some suggestion on it. And at the end, just a few words on what we can do concerning this big issue. So Laudato Si, you've got there Spanish publication of the cover. Laudato Si stands from the words of the hymn of the Saint of Assisi, the hymn of creation. Praise be to you, Lord. Laudato Si, on the care for the common home. On the care for the common home. And this pastoral letter is unique because of this. This is the first letter from a pope totally devoted to the care for environment, to the care for nature, to the social and environmental justice that come together in this encyclical. And this is somehow unique, and that's why we should be proud of having this encyclical among those writings from our popes. It doesn't mean that the church hasn't been working on these issues before. If we must be faithful within the church, since the Council Vatican II, there's been a progressive understanding of environmental and ecological issues. As we human beings, through science and technology, learn more about the consequences of our activities, our church has been always informed by science and people. And when you track back the words from different popes, we can find that Paul VI was the first who addressed encouraging words, that I would say prophetic words, concerning the ecological crisis that we human beings are facing in the world. In 1970, November the 16th, Paul VI addressed an exhortation to members of the FAO, the farming organization of the UN in Rome. They met in Rome, and he gave these words. Let me read them. Pope Paul VI said, "Man is suddenly becoming aware that by an ill-considered exploitation of nature, he risks destroying it and becoming in his turn the victim of this degradation. not only in the material environment becoming a permanent menace, pollution and refuse, new illness and absolute destructive capacity, but the human framework is no longer under man's control, thus creating an environment for tomorrow which may well be intolerable. Everything is bound together, interrelated. We must be attentive to the large-scale consequences that every intervention of man brings about in the balance of nature, which has been put at man's disposition in all its harmonious richness according to the loving designs of the Creator. That's been said over 45 years ago by Pope Paul VI. So these are really prophetic words that resound now in our church, but also in humanity. So, concern on ecological issues in the church gradually started to grow. Justice and peace, for instance, at the beginning in the 70s, we used to speak justice and peace, slowly opened up to integrity of creation as a new horizon, has never been done before, to take care of creation, to integrate the created things as an inherent part of the human life dignity for all human beings. Because we cannot care for the poor, we cannot care for their livelihood if the river behind their towns is polluted, if they have no access to fresh water or even to care centers or facilities. Based on great work done by former popes, Pope Francis has given us a gift. Laudato Si is a gift, especially because he has taught us the link between spirituality and the care for creation. For many years in the church, especially those who have been working on this for many years before Laudato Si, one really big challenge that we had was how to convince our fellows, our faith people, our bishops and priests that this is a big issue. Especially it was difficult to make a link. I mean, how you can connect your faith, your spirituality with the care for environment, with the care for the poor. So slowly we started to think about it through conferences, different meetings, gathering people everywhere, and slowly the church was able to gather information and to deepen the reflection, and that's why it could come, this encyclical. It's not an overnight encyclical. It's an encyclical that comes from long time of working from many peoples, from many communities, but especially for those who are really committed and are faithful to the gospel of Jesus. And Pope Francis also teaches us in the encyclical that it is a matter of knowing how to read the sign of the times. We can read the issues that we are facing, the ecological crisis, in hope. That is his main message. We need to recover hope, or we can read them in distress. As a scientist, I tell you that usually, from the scientific point of view, I am distressed. But then when I come back to my spirituality as a Carmelite, I recover hope, because I believe, as Pope Francis, that God has given us two great gifts that we have to develop. And Pope Francis speaks about them in the encyclical. That is intelligence. We've got intelligence, but also we got goodwill. And goodwill means the consciousness that we must respond with love and care for environment, that we were entrusted by God from the beginning, from the origin. Remember Genesis, Genesis chapter 2:15. God places human being in the garden. The garden is a metaphor for environment, for nature, to cultivate it and to care of it. So, what is not Laudato Si? What we cannot expect from that encyclical? The encyclical Laudato Si does not provide technical guidance on how to allocate users' rights for the environment. It's not a handbook for technical solutions of environmental problems. The ecological issues are very big things, I mean multidimensional. According to where you are, you got different scale levels of difficulties. So you may find regional ecological issues, city level ecological issues, national levels, intercontinental problems. So Pope Francis is not an engineer at all, so he cannot provide that information. It's your work, your duty to look for your own problems and solutions in dialogue. Pope Francis says, come into dialogue. We need to speak up these things. But certainly there are several global ecological issues that are affecting globally everybody, all the nations, and these are things that he decided to speak about, especially to orient the principles that he wants to give us in order to look for solutions. So it's not a handbook, it's not a how-to guidance in looking for solution, but Pope Francis sheds more light upon the ethical dimension of the ecological problem and can thus provide us fundamental principles to be applied for the look in these solutions. So what the encyclical does offer throughout the pages, throughout the chapters, at least we can find 4 ethical principles that are already known, but it's necessary probably to recover. The preferential option for the poor, which are the most vulnerable of our global actions against nature. And probably the new thing that Pope Francis includes in his encyclical is that the poor is also the nature, creatures that are affected by human beings' activity, together with certainly human beings, or those the most vulnerable. The inter and intragenerational justice is in the core of the encyclical. Francis questions, what kind of world do we want to leave to those who come after us, to children who are now growing up? The intra in the sense that we are affecting people, poor people right now, but also those who are coming in the future. The way we behave nowadays is compromising the livelihood of future generations. This is something that science teaches us every day. And also, common but differentiated responsibility. Yes, we live in a common home, that is the subtitle of the encyclical on care for our common home. So we are all responsible of the care for our house, for our home, but not equally responsible. There are nations more responsible than other regions or nations because of history, because of development patterns, and many other things that we can recognize easily just by looking at around what's going on. So, and 4, orientation to the common good. In order to preserve nature and guarantee social justice, we need to recover the social teaching of the Church of the common good. There are things that are not good to consider them as private thing. For instance, climate is a common good. Every action that compromises the quality of climate should not be allowed to continue doing, because that will affect human beings worldwide in the present time, but also in the futures. One thing that, for instance, one ethical principle that we learn from the encyclical is kind of a Kantian value. You remember Kant. Whatever you want to do to nature, for instance, to the ocean or to climate, if what you do to climate doesn't affect it, well, let's multiply that by the 7 million people we are in the world. Would be that possible? Can you universalize your action worldwide without compromising the quality of nature? If not, don't do it. Don't do it. Because that's not just. That's not morally good. That's what we learn from the encyclical. Also, Laudato Si brings forth ethical lights on the universal destination of goods, which is really contradicted by excessive consumerism in some countries, that becomes impossible to generalize. Also, our overconsumption culture is not possible to universalize. If we want that all human beings on earth consume the way we do, really we will need 4 more planets of goods in order to satisfy their consumption. So this is not possible. The care of what is fragile and weak against the overwhelming spirit of modern man. In this respect, care for the environment and the ocean for the poor go together like two realities that do not appear as economically profitable and does not go in line with the immediate revenue, right? But we need to care for reality that is double-faced. I mean, Pope Francis means also, reality is both environment and human beings. The poor and the nature must be looked after. Also, the human ecology and the cultural ecology, we need to respect the indigenous people, we need to respect the different cultures. We are really living in a globalized society that is kind of sweeping out the differences among nations, and that is not really a good thing, because we can learn from the traditions of the cultures how to relate with nature peacefully, harmonically, something that we have lost in this paradigm of relationships that we are under. And finally, he also provides a spirituality that clearly incorporates the value of sobriety and sense of profound union with everything that exists. And he calls this spirituality integral ecology, as we'll see later. So from the first paragraphs of Laudato Si, number 1, number 2, Pope Francis wants us to be in another level of relationship with nature. The earth, he says, as our sister, is our sister and mother. Number 1, our sister and mother earth. What does it mean? That we cannot consider environment without an intimate relationship with her, with it. I mean, we are family to the environment. We are part of it as we were a family. So in family relationships, you usually look after one another and you care for the good, for the wellness of the members of your family. So the earth is our sister and mother. And this is interesting because this image that he uses comes from the poem of Saint of Assisi, Francis of Assisi. So he needs the mysticism of a saint in order to reshape our understanding of how is our relationship with nature. So a kind of family intimacy with nature that is something not seen before, with such mystical nuances among the writings from the previous popes, because as I told you, Pope John II, John Paul II, and also Benedict XVI, he wrote many messages, even whole paragraphs in their encyclicals on issues on environment. For instance, Caritas in Veritate, for us was considered at the time a green ecology, a green letter, a pastoral letter, because Pope Benedict XVI, he addressed many issues connecting dots of the ecological crisis, especially the economy that kills, or the oblivion of God. The oblivion of God that is kind of an imbalance. We've got an imbalance of perception in our relationship with nature because we have forgotten the sacredness that is present in nature through the presence, through the dimension of God Creator, the Creator. Francis provides plus subjectivity to the earth. He says, she has a voice that cries out on account of the damage done by human beings. The earth cries out, she groans and suffers the pains of delivery. Again, taking advantage from the Bible. So also the Bible offers support to our origin. We are to earth. We too are earth. So we are made of earth. And that is a biblical understanding. It's also a mystical understanding that the human beings must recover the original relation with nature. As a mother, as a sister. Probably, I want to open a break here. When Pope Francis speaks about the earth as sister and mother, it could be also translated as brother and father. The matter is that either in Italian or in Spanish, nouns has gender, and the earth for us is feminine, female. Like in Italian, the hymn of Francis of Assisi is feminine. That's why we call sister and mother, but you can also speak of brother and father earth. In English, it's perfectly exchangeable. The issue is not more than that. Also, from the beginning, if you read, for instance, in number 63 and 64, I suggest you to read, Francis rejects the biblical language of domination. For long, we have been ascribed by the ecological movements, those who are more radical, they have said, because of you, Christians and Jews, we are behaving the way we behave against nature, because in your Bible, in your scripture, you've got that scripture that says that human beings can take domination against nature. Genesis 1:26. Well, Pope Francis devoted a nice teaching, catechesis on how to read, how to correctly read the books of Genesis. And clearly, in Genesis, the environment of the earth is further presented using the metaphor of the garden, as I told you before, in which God places the human being to cultivate it and to care of it. So, the dominion that in chapter 1 speaks about our relationship is not a dominion in sense of domination, imposition, but is an understanding of authority, of power shared by God to human beings in order to continue His work on the work of creation. So it's a completely new and a different understanding of the issue. Human relationships with nature, with environment on earth, should be in such a manner as that work done by a steward. A steward is someone which is in charge or has given a responsibility given by the owner, the creator, that is God, of the thing. In this case, the garden. So we were God's stewards in the origins. I said were because, in fact, we are not stewards really. We are thieves. We are robbers of the garden. So stewardship means that the conscious and responsible management of something entrusted to one's care. We were instructed to care until God's creation. Well, this teaching appears also in Laudato Si. So Francis offers a metaphorical understanding using the concept of integral ecology. Integral ecology that appears in chapter 3, developed, also appears in the introduction. Pope Francis says the following: integral ecology demands new categories that go beyond the physics, the language of mathematics, or of biology. Something is missing. It's not enough. We need new categories that connect us to the essence of what is human. Sorry, I copied wrongly but the reference number 11. Look at it. The language of mathematics or biology or of physics are not enough to express what he wants, what he means by integral ecology. We require new categories that connect us to the essence of what is human to understand integral ecology. So Francis is opening the door to the language of the spirit, to the spirituality of integral ecology. In other words, integral ecology is not simply another category among those that social science or earth sciences offers, but also a specific theological category that we have to take into consideration in our expression of the faith and in our relationship with nature. Spirituality of integral ecology. In some way, in the encyclical, we may understand that spirituality as the way and beliefs that guide the fundamental options and decisions of life, a new way that gives rise to an alternative lifestyle distinct from the dominant culture of consumerism and waste. That is what we can understand by integral spirituality. So a new set of values, a new set of relationships. And ecology can be understood as the deep understanding or knowledge of the right relationships present in the environment and life enclosed by it, which allows a balanced and healthy deployment of the potentialities of life in that specific geography. So the horizon of that kind of spirituality is to recover the contemplation. Human beings have to recover the spiritual or the mystical stance in order to go beyond our this solution in looking for. Everything is interconnected, and this invites us to develop a spirituality of that global solidarity which flows from the mystery of the Trinity. We have to recover the Trinity mystery among reality, in reality. Contemplation is not a static dynamism, but the inner human space where spirituality expands upon creation. The spiritual and the physical dimension of reality can be regarded through the Trinitarian dynamism, the divine power, the humanness, and the other created things, both visible and invisible, in mutual interpenetration, being the divine power, the Spirit of God, the enveloping and sustaining source of reality. And that is where we have to recover the place of God in creation, something that already Benedict XVI has pointed out as one of the, probably the roots, the human spiritual roots of the current economic and also ecological crisis worldwide. Just some examples taken from the encyclical about the contemplation stance and relationship with environment. As Christians, Pope Francis says, we are also called to accept the world as a sacrament of communion, as a way of sharing with God and our neighbors on a global scale. It is our humble conviction that the divine and the human meet in the slightest detail in the seamless garment of God's creation, in that last speck of dust of our planet. This is beautiful. Or at the end, for instance, number 84, the entire material universe speaks of God's love, His boundless affection for us. Soil, water, mountains, everything is as it were, a caress of God. A caress of God. Only a saint, a mystic can speak in that way. And the changes, I would say, the turning point of our understanding of the human relationship with nature that previously was too pragmatical, too utilitarian because of the oblivion of God. One thing that we can take into account, that when you forget God in the horizon of human reality, on the deployment of human beings, is that you convert the nature as an object. And you use it as if you were going into a mall and pick up all the things that you need and then you discard. And the other stance, if you forget the horizon of God in reality, is the other way around. Nature is so sacred that it's untouchable. These opposite extreme stances are not Christian. We need to balance our relationship, including God in the middle. So, the turning point of that understanding appears in 83 of Laudato Si. For me, it is the essence of the message. The ultimate destiny of the universe is in the fullness of God, which has already been attained by the risen Christ, the measure of the maturity of all things. Here we can add yet another argument for rejecting every tyrannical or irresponsible domination of human beings over other creatures. The ultimate purpose of other creatures is not to be found in us. Things are not there, created things not there for our consumption. Rather, all creatures are moving forward with us and through us towards a common point of arrival, which is God, in that transcendent fullness where the risen Christ embraces us and illumines all things. Human beings endowed with intelligence and love, what I told you at the beginning, and drawn by the fullness of Christ, are called to lead all creatures back to their Creator. That is the sense of creation, of nature, and of us in our mutual relationship. Integral ecology is a new paradigm of relationships. Francis poses us into a new understanding of human relationship with nature. He wants us to pass from an image of the human being as a sovereign ruler over the rest of creation to another paradigm of a universal, intimate family, common home, in solidarity with the weak and marginalized people and living beings in danger of extinction on this common home. So the new paradigm requires faith. He says, while this encyclical opens up a dialogue with all to seek paths of liberation together, I want to show from the beginning how the convictions of faith offer Christians, and in part also to other believers, great motivation for the care of nature and of the most fragile brothers and sisters. Without faith, we are lost in the path. Conviction of faith to heal the planet. Pope Francis says, the entire material universe is a language of God's love, of His excessive affection towards us. The soil, the water, the mountains, everything is the caress of God. You discover that through faith and through your inner relationship with God through nature. Francis is convinced that to perceive each creature singing the hymn of his existence is to live joyfully in the love of God and in hope. From this core of convictions, the Pope assumes the call to peace, to justice, and to the preservation of the created. We have to be motivated by this reality from your heart. The central message of Pope Francis is that, consequently, his profound experience of love for God through each creature and the poor. So that's why he says, when someone does not learn to stop, to perceive and value the beautiful, it is not strange that everything comes for him an object of unscrupulous use and abuse. We need mysticism to change the world. So, let's go now to my second goal. Chapter 1 of Laudato Si is totally looking at the stage of the planet. Pope Francis, in this encyclical, used the theological method of to see, to judge, and to act. So, in order to see the state of our planet, we need the diagnosis that only the tools of science provide. That's why he asks for solid information from different scientists. And that's what we find in that chapter. Pope Francis selected 6 topics that are worldwide known in the scientific world and developed them. But again, it's a selection. Problems are a lot of them. There are more. And here, I want to stress 4 of them that for me are the most important that science tells us about it. The growth of the world's population inequality. Pope Francis says inequity, affects not only individuals but entire countries. 80% of the goods of our planet are consumed by only 25% of the population. So the affluence inequality or inequity is really a source of pressure and a source of distress for the planet. The loss of biodiversity, we are about the rate of extinction is 1,000 times higher than natural one because of human activities. That is really a very big issue. The issue of energy depletion, it's also pressing our planet, our system, provoking not only natural catastrophes but also social injustice, right? All of them. And also, chief probably among all of them, climate change. Pope Francis speaks on climate change as it represents one of the principal challenges facing humanity in our day. So in general, when we speak about ecological crisis, we are speaking about human issues, human matter. It's a problem from us, and we have to look for these solutions. And climate change, well, this is just to illustrate the first one, the inequity. Weekly consumption of food in families from different countries, according to the Time magazine, is nothing from the church, but the image speaks out by itself. This is when we speak about that as an issue that Pope Francis wants to take and make us be aware of that. So science speaks that we live in an earth that is a finite place. It means that goods of the earth are limited and under the law of entropy. I cannot explain now what is that, but believe me, all human activity consumes goods and reduces possibilities irreversibly. We are leaving for future generations less opportunities. And third, urgency in establishing priorities in the use of sources of usable energy and earth goods for activities that have a positive impact on the flourishing of present and future communities. This is what science teaches us that we have to do. The sciences teach us that. As challenges, we have to fix the economy, preserve energy, and fix the social logic that we are still based on the culture of consumerism and erosion of social and individual commitments. This is said by economists and social scientists, not by the church. But these are the learning from to see the state of our planet. And I like this expression written by an Englishman, Tim Jackson, in his book Prosperity Without Growth. He's an economist. He says, the real and present danger is to delude ourselves with the possibility, thanks to technological magic, of an economy of infinite growth with immediate gain and the saving of the earth resources all at the same time. It's impossible. There is a contradiction in that paradigm that still rules out. So now let's go quickly. I think I have not much time, or I have still 10 more minutes. Climate change, a warmer planet. And I would like to make you go back to high school, right? What do I need to cook climate on Earth? Because when we speak on a global climate, we must understand climate for the planet, for the Earth. Every planet in the solar system has its own climate. Jupiter climate, Saturn's climate, the Earth climate. In that sense, climate can be cooked. Like when you cook a cake, we need a recipe to follow and ingredients. If we change the ingredients, instead of a cake, we can cook a monster in the oven. Well, the same happens with the Earth. If we change some of the ingredients, we can produce a monster at the end that is impossible. One ingredient is the difference of energy or heat between the poles and the equator. Without going into details, we know that because of the round shape of the Earth, we've got a meridional gradient of surface temperatures, more heat in the equator regions, lower temperatures in the polar regions, and that difference produces climate, the climate that we have nowadays on the planet. That is why scientists, we are always monitoring what's going on with the ice in the poles, because changes in the ice caps will alter this difference, dramatically changing also the planet on Earth, right? The second ingredient is the speed of rotation of the Earth. You know that the Earth rotates along its axis, every 24 hours makes one circle, but it can change because of different processes like a tsunami. If it speeds up, we're going to have a more dynamical weather patterns climate. If it slows down, we're going to have a more stable summer-like New Orleans climate worldwide. So that is very nice. But okay. And the third, but not the least ingredient that is very important is the energy budget. Scientists, we speak about energy budget as the balance of energy that the Earth has, the amount of fuel in her tank in order to work, in order to produce life, to produce ocean currents, waves in the ocean, produce hurricanes, biosphere, forests, crops, animals, etc. We need energy, and that energy comes from the sun totally. Almost 99.99% of the energy comes from there. And the amount of energy that the Earth absorbs depends on the distance to the sun. The farther we are from the sun, the less energy we got, and the closer, the more energy. So the average, the amount of energy depends on that distance, and one way to measure that energy is through the surface air temperature, the global one. And it yields about 15 degrees Celsius, or 58 Fahrenheit. So that is the amount of energy that the Earth has to work. But, for instance, what is the other planetary system that is more or less the same distance as the sun, as the Earth is from the sun? The moon. The moon is as close as us from the sun. But when we measure the energy that the moon has to work as a planet, the energy yields minus 18 degrees Celsius, that is about 0 Fahrenheit. So much lower. And why is that? Because the Earth has something special, a blanket. A blanket that prevents that the Earth loses energy into the space. Like our body, when we cover our body with a blanket, it's not because the blanket can't warm up, but the blanket prevents our body release heat into the room of the space of the room. Well, the atmosphere is the blanket of our planet, okay? So less energy is lost into the room of space, out of outer space, and in this way we have an equilibrium, much energy, and we flow and we work the way we do. But human beings, what we are doing because of burning fossil fuels especially, is making this blanket thicker every year. Every year, because we are adding more blankets into the atmosphere, or more gases into the atmosphere, we are making that blanket thicker, right? Apart from the ingredients, we also need a recipe. The recipe are given by the Navier-Stokes equation that I will not explain, so don't worry. So, what is climate change? It's an imbalance of energy. Satellites, for instance, nowadays can measure how much energy comes from the sun to the Earth system, and how much energy the Earth emits out into the space, and make this the calculation, the budget, and every year yields 1% more energy inside the system. So we've got a more energetic planet every year because of the thickening of the blanket, because of human beings' activities. This is the global warming. Because more energy is translated into more heat in the air, more energy. But one thing that we have to pay attention is that the energy flows throughout the Earth system. When we speak about a climate, we are not speaking only of the air, but also of oceans, of ice caps, of glaciers, of lakes, rivers, biosphere. These all compound the climate, right? Because interact one another. and the energy flows. So certain years, the energy is stored in the air, so that year we may have a relative warmer year. Other years, the energy flows and goes into the ice caps, so the ice in the Arctic or Antarctica melts. So that year we may measure a relative cool year, but it doesn't mean that cool year in the air is because we are not anymore in a warming planet, because the extra energy of 1% every year is still there. So be careful, because sometimes we listen in the media, oh, this year is colder than 10 years ago, where is the global warming? Global warming is there, but the flows of energy goes in different places. Look at the chart. This chart is the very useful way to measure that energy, that is through the global surface air temperature anomaly against pre-industrial period. I mean, we usually speak about the period before 1750 as pre-industrial, because before that date, the blanket of the atmosphere was 280 parts per million thick, and that was stable, that thickness, for over 10,000 years before. In the last year, the thickness of the blanket is 405, so 45% more than the pre-industrial. That's why we are in this warming planet. You will see the figures show us that really we are going towards warmer temperatures in the air, though year to year we may have changes. For instance, in this year we have a relative warmer year, and the coming years is relative a cooler year, but in the long terms we are towards warmer temperatures. For instance, 2016 was the warmest year in this time series that I'm showing you here. And last year was the 2018 was the fourth warmest in the time series. So we cannot say that because this year is relatively cooler than this one, we are not warming anymore. It means only that the heat flows and now is being stored somewhere else. Where? Especially in the oceans. Inside the ocean, in the upper layers, and really we see that in this is last year, a peak, this is in the peak. So we are really, while we are not warmer in the air, we are warmer in the ocean, because we are storing the energy there. One day that energy will go back again into the atmosphere, like happened in 2016 during El Niño year. Niño years are years in which that energy stored in the Pacific Ocean goes back into the air. And La Niña years, like last year, is when the energy goes from the air to the ocean. So from time to time that energy goes back again, and we'll have another peak in our air temperature anomaly, so towards warmer temperature. We're going to have here another peak that we're going to pass for sure 1.3 degrees Celsius of warming in the coming years, whenever a big El Niño year we may have again, because the energy is a surplus due to human beings and it's there flowing. Look at this spiral warming chart. I like it because it shows us two limits, two threshold of warming that we shouldn't pass through according to science, because if we warm more than 2 degrees Celsius, this is the Paris Agreement, we're going to pass through tipping points that will destroy the livelihood of our planet. And if we see monthly, in the late years, we have already reached 1.5 degrees Celsius. So, according to our estimations from models and statistics, if we continue emitting carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases or blanket gases into the atmosphere through the burning of fossil fuels, we'll reach that 2 degrees Celsius threshold in 2037. We're close in time. So that's why Paris Agreement was really a great deal for all nations. And all nations endorsed the agreement, though then some repented because of other interests. Well, this is just to show you last year. Look at the anomaly. The last year, though it was not much warm as the 2016, the anomaly we observed them in the northern and southern poles. The heat is flowing into the ice caps, and look at the ocean is cooling here because it's being stored inside that region. So, one other thing that I want to share with you is also this: the shrinking of the Arctic. Because of the energy flows into the Arctic. Every year we get less ice extent in the Arctic. One day will happen, probably within 20 years, that the ice caps in the Arctic will not be formed anymore, with changes in the dynamics. Look at this picture. This shows us the trend in the ice extent anomaly. Clearly, we are going towards negative values because the Arctic is melting. Look at the Antarctica. Before 2015, there was more or less a stable behavior, nor positive nor negative, and the skeptics say, oh, you see, the Antarctica is not melting at all, that's bullshit, etc. Scientists, we had an explanation for this. The vortex in southern pole is so strong that it isolates Antarctica from the rest of the world, and that's why the exchange of heat was always naturally much lower. But once that happened, because if you see there is an increasing year-to-year variation, this means instability, more extreme event, and it happened in 2016. We have a sudden shrunk of the ice extent in Antarctica. This lot of ice will not be recovered in the coming decades. And that means changes in the difference of energy between the poles and the equator. So this is a tipping point. Once you cross beyond, you cannot go back easily. And the system is being pushed in that way more frequently. And with this, I want to finish more or less my talk. It's about the sea level rise. In a warming planet, it's consistent to have expansion of the oceans because of the heat absorption and the sea level rise, plus the fresh water that comes from the ice that now are melting. In the last 100 years, the sea level rise globally yields an average of 20 centimeters. This is the curve, right? From the last 25 years, but you can go back up to the beginning of the 20th century. So 20 centimeters, you may say, well, that is not much, Eduardo. What's the matter? The matter is this. Because of the ocean dynamics, that sea level rise is not unevenly distributed, but are regions that are affected most. And when we look at this map, red colors speak about much higher values than the 20 centimeter average, and this color, light blue colors, lower anomalies than 20 centimeters. So clearly the region most affected is the central western Pacific. The Philippines, all the Pacific Islands, and in this region nowadays that sea level rise is over 1 meter because of the heat expansion of the oceans due to the global warming. That's why these islands in the 90s were the first to go to the UN and speak up saying, please do something to stop the global warming. And that's when the UN organized the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change and all the experts that gather every 4 years to make the report and so forth. So this is going on. And this is what's already happening there. Ocean on the islands sweeping out the villages on average. So they are the first refugees, environmental refugees that we are facing. That is why Pope Francis speaks about this is a challenge. A very solid scientific consensus indicates that we are presently witnessing a disturbing warming of the climate system. Many of those who possesses more resources and economic or political power seem mostly to be concerned with masking the problems or concealing their symptoms. Whatever comes to reality, simply making efforts to reduce some of the negative impacts of climate change. And when I look at this picture, I had the opportunity in 2010 to go to the Philippines and this region to give talks to our friars there. And for me, this map was a nice mapping. I love mapping. But when I came back from that region, I came with faces. Poor people suffering, the loss of their crops, the loss of their homes, the loss of their lands, islands, history, because of this. So from that moment, we spoke with Mario Bergoglio at the time. When I see this map, I see the wounds of the earth. I see wounds in the earth. That at the same time it speaks of the wounds of the poor who are living there. So two faces of the same coin. That's why Pope Francis writes in the encyclical, today, however, we have to realize that a true ecological approach always becomes a social approach. It must integrate questions of justice in debates on the environment so as to hear both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. The groaning of Sister Earth, which joins the groaning of the abandon of the world with a cry that demands another course. Remember, Pope Francis, 6 months before the launching of the encyclical, went to Manila and gave them support and will do something. He was in charge of doing the encyclical to make pressure for the Paris Agreement. Okay, so this is finally my message. I've got many details to give you if you want to make more profundization, but well, Justin Bieber is not responsible. But what we can do, I can give you an explanation, but we have no time. Just to summarize, what we can do, change our pattern of consumption. Pope Francis speaks about we need to learn from the mysticism that less is more. A life in which less is more. Because we are still in the throwaway logic that is killing the planet. First, that is first. Because also, secondly, change our investment choices. We need to stop fostering and investing our money in oil extractive industries as currently we are doing. It doesn't mean, as I said at the beginning, no more oil. We will continue drilling oil, but not at the pace we are doing now. Because at the pace we are doing now is unsustainable concerning climate. And we need to foster investment in alternative clean energies such as those related with sun, with winds, with ocean waves, with rivers, lowering their prices and showing them as new, better businesses. Many countries are doing so, especially in Europe, in South America, in Asia. And I sadly heard last week, watching TV with my friars in Chicago, the address of Pope Trump of the State of the Union. And he said so proudly, last year the United States, for first time in 76 years, we were the #1 producers of oil. Shouldn't be that because the other countries are in the other way, investing their money in other things, in this consciousness of climate change? What else we can do? Support or join a civil social organization to advocate on global climate justice as our Carmelite NGO, but also simple things. Pope Francis speaks about simple things, recycle, use things until it ends its useful life. We need to be energetically efficient. If we can, use public transportation, walk more, etc. Whatever we can do to reduce our carbon footprint into the atmosphere, that would be great to save our planet. And again, the spirituality of integral ecology is required to change the logic of consumerism. We need to rediscover new ways to relate of life, new ways to understand happiness, flourishment, realization, accomplishment as human beings, and not only materially. There are other ways out there that we have only to look for them inside us. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. And finish with these words from Pope Francis: we need to strengthen the conviction that we are one single human family. There are no frontiers or barriers, political or social, behind which we can hide. Still less is there room for the globalization of indifference. Thank you.